what's actually here asking to be felt, right? The more we ask those questions with patience and a place for it to go, like, no matter what I'm feeling, my body's on the ground and I can trust that gravity's going to hold me. Right now, I can let my body drop into gravity. It's going to hold me. So I'm here. And that lets me turn towards whatever I might have been trying to avoid.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the show. I have a really special episode for you today. It's actually a live episode, or a live recording, that is, of a conversation that I led at Split Rock Bookstore with Abigail Rose Clarke. Abigail is a somatic educator, writer, and artist. You might remember her because she was also on the podcast in season 2, one of my favorite episodes ever, and I will be sure to link to that episode in the show notes. In that episode, we explored how to be in relationship to our bodies and to the foods we eat. Well, in this episode, we're diving into Abigail's book, Returning Home to Our Bodies. If you read my newsletter, you have seen me reference this book several times. I love this book so much. It is packed with wisdom, and Abigail is sharing some of that wisdom with you all today. So I'm recording this in late October, but this episode is actually going to air right before Thanksgiving, which I love. Now, I have to say, we're about to head into an election, and I have no idea what's going to be happening in the world when this episode airs. However, I do know that the holiday season, which kicks off this week, is one of the most stressful times of year. And this isn't even taking into account what might also be happening on the world stage. This episode today, I think, is going to be so nourishing and to help you, certainly helped me find more grounding. Abigail shares really simple, I will say not easy, but simple tools for finding grounding within ourselves and for feeling supported even when we're experiencing grief or heartache or loss or any of the myriad other emotions that we might be confronted with, well, at any time of year, but perhaps even most especially this time of year. She also offers a tool for helping us root back into love, which I think is so important. In fact, I think it's the only way that we can begin to enact real, authentic change in our lives, not to mention the world at large. I really think you're going to love this conversation and certainly find it fascinating. If you want to get a copy, a signed copy of Abigail's book, I will include a link to Split Rock Bookstore. They're selling signed copies and they ship nationwide, and it could be a really lovely holiday gift to someone you love or perhaps even to yourself. Also, if you want more support this season, I'm here to help. In my one-on-one coaching and cooking sessions, I work with clients to help them decondition from the myriad ways we are conditioned around food to find more freedom and presence and joy in the kitchen and perhaps in these bodies of ours. I would love to work with you. If the work calls to you, I'll include a link below where you can learn more. Finally, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this podcast, this ad-free podcast and the newsletter. This is community-supported work. It could not happen without all of you. Easy way you can support this work is to send this podcast episode to a friend who you think might be interested, or maybe share it on social media. That really helps out. You can rate the podcast on your podcast app. And of course, you can become a subscriber to the Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter. I send out weekly brand new recipes. I dive deeper into these topics. And if you become a paid member for just $5 a month, less than a cup of coffee these days, you make all of this happen. This work could not happen without your paid support. As a paid subscriber, you have access to the full recipe archive, you get bonus content, and you also receive an exclusive discount on those one-on-one coaching and cooking sessions. Okay, my friends, let's dive into the show. Thanks for being here. I think we're going to start by asking you a question to frame this book. You are a somatic educator. And I know we talked about this in our last podcast episode, But I think we need to start by explaining what is somatics and what is somatic practice.
Yeah. Okay. It's a really important question because it is a word that gets used a lot. But when I started working in the field of somatics, it was a word that was never used. So it's been interesting to watch that path where I used to have to explain it because no one knew what somatics was. And now I feel like I have to explain it because it gets marketed to us in a lot of different ways. So it's like somatic life coaching, somatic weight loss coaching, somatic sex coaching, somatic relationship coaching. It's like it's just used a lot, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's happening in your algorithm, but it's definitely happening in mine. But the way I use somatics, it generally is sort of, it's used when you see it out, it means, okay, this is going to be focused on the body. And it can be used really synonymously with maybe mindfulness and meditation. But the way that I use the word somatic is that soma of the body, but it also means of the whole body, whereas anatomy means to cut up into pieces. Anatomia, to cut into pieces, literally. That's what the anatomy means. So an anatomical mindset would be looking at the pieces, taking the pieces out and looking at them separately. And a somatic view looks at the whole body. But then taking that out another layer, the whole of my body is in relationship with the whole of the world that I inhabit. Definitely our intimate space, right? We know this because of COVID. Like, that's why people mask, because your body's in relationship with the world around you, right? But it's more than that. It's, we're now changing seasons. Our bodies are going to change. Everyone talks about how your blood has to get thicker, right? It's like, it's not exactly what's happening, but you have to acclimate to your ecosystem. It goes beyond that, right? Like layers and layers beyond that. The whole of my body is in relationship with the whole of the Earth's body. And to me, there's much less of a separation than our individualistic culture pushes us to consider, but pushes us to believe in. Because using these two words, we come from an anatomical culture where we take things apart and we dissect it and we look at these isolated pieces and we consider ourselves isolated individuals. And it's just like, well, here I am and there you are. And maybe we're going to have some sort of transaction, but it's really still, I'm over here, I'm me, and you're over there, you're you. Versus a somatic mindset, and worldview and way of being, which recognizes that we are inherently in relationship with the whole that we are a part of, right? So when I say somatic, I'm saying it that way. I'm saying this is a way of being in whole body relationship, and the whole is always a set point. So we might take apart things because somatics needs the study of anatomy. Like, I love my anatomy books. I love my anatomical studies. I love the doctors and surgeons I get to talk to about their precise view of what all these different structures are, right? And are we then coming back into the whole as the set point and not just staying in our little niched out pieces, right? So that everything is actually in relationship all of the time. So when I say somatics, it's my work is focused on the body. Everything comes back to the body, but it's the whole of my body and the whole of our bodies and the whole of the world.
I love that because I think people, it's true, somatics starts with our physical self, but our physical self is connected to everything else.
Yeah.
So often we don't see. And one thing that you talk about in your book is how this relationship that we have with our bodies is also in relationship to a culture of hierarchy and binary.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really tricky one because so hierarchies, obviously like these people or this part of this thing is more important, right? Like the food pyramid or the food chain or whatever it is that we learn in school, right? Where it's like man's at the top and then everything down below. That's since been, sort of composted as an idea because it's a web and you pull on one strand and you pull on the whole. But those hierarchies get baked into us and it's systemic on a social level and it certainly influences how we might relate to our relationships, right? Like adults being hierarchical over children rather than being in a relationship that recognizes, hey, you don't know the world yet. I have to nurture you and make sure that you're safe, but I'm not controlling you.
Yeah.
So hierarchy to me is really speaking to a nature of control, like these rules that try and maintain a semblance of order because the chaos creates too much fear or the unknown creates too much fear. right? And I think that that's really at an underlying core of it is like, how comfortable are we in sitting with what is unknown, what is emergent, what is like, coming forward, and what is on not even a spectrum. Somebody in a workshop I gave recently was like, a spectrum's not enough because a spectrum still implies a line. It's a constellation. It's like this, this whole universe of possibilities. That being said, priorities exist, right? Like, I have people who I prioritize in my life. I have things that I prioritize in my life. That can start to look like it's a hierarchy, like, oh, you're more important to me than this other person. But it's really just a priority. It's like, who's the closest into my little nucleus, right? Who am I letting in the closest? And well, those are the relationships that I'm going to feed the most and be fed by the most. So it's not hierarchy, but there is a certain, we all have them, like those friends where you're just like, no, your gravitational field influences mine.
Yeah.
I orbit around you, right? That's not a hierarchy. It's not like, oh, inherently you're more important than this other person. But it is this like recognition that we're choosing who we orient ourselves to, like what we orient ourselves to, not just necessarily human relationships, but also just like the whole of it. Because the world is huge. Like we do need to kind of, niche down a little. But are we doing it from a place of control and trying to push the fear away? Or are we able to do it from a place of recognizing that what I feed feeds me, so I'm going to make that choice on purpose, right? As a cookbook writer.
Thank you for the feedback. Well, it makes me think about this idea of our bodies and how we even start to bring that into how we think about our bodies. Because I do think that we have an idea of certain elements of our bodies being more important. And, like I said, we can prioritize certain things. But what if we took away this hierarchy or this need to control and instead allowed the constellation of who we are and what we're feeling and our, literal physiological experience, and just know that it's all there without judgment and without trying to control it or place maybe good versus very good versus kind of good versus this sucks.
Yeah, which is hard to do because obviously we have preferences. It'd be weird to not have preferences. And, we're never going to be completely extracted from the cultures and the systems that we've been, raised into. So a lot of wellness conversations are really ableist conversations at their core. And they'll often miss the point that a lot of these issues around what it means to be in a temporarily abled or a disabled body is about access, right? And support. Our approach to disability would be vastly different if our systems and our architecture and our culture embrace disability in a different way, right? Because we've seen it. Like this, colonized culture is not the only one that's on record. And it's not always like this, right? Where like the people who are not normally able bodies get pushed to the sides, right? That's not always what happens.
Yeah.
It's not the only way. So that's just one example of how when we examine how we're thinking about our bodies, it's really important to keep an eye on what is systemic and what is, making sure that we're not getting pulled into this trap of thinking that everything's individual. Like, for an example, when I turned 40, I'm about to be 42. When I turned 40, I really thought that I wasn't going to have an issue with aging, right? Because I'm I've been a feminist my whole life. I embrace my body positivity, all this good stuff, right? Like all this stuff. I don't buy into the idea that women age out of usefulness. Like my last few months of my 30s, I was honestly a little shooken up by it. I was like, what does this mean? What is it even what does it all mean for me, right? Thankfully, I turned 40 and literally my last fuck just dried up and floated away. But in that time beforehand, it was like, oh no, what am I? I'm not a good enough radical. I'm not embracing my this means something about me that I actually care about this. But what I also had to just dig into is no, there are ways that the culture as a whole treats women differently as they age that can be a little scary, right? Pretty privilege exists. Youth privilege exists. If I'm denying that that's true, I'm actually digging it in deeper.
Yeah.
Rather than being it actually it exists. And I'm not a bad person or a bad feminist for naming my discomfort with the thought of losing these privileges. It actually should just inspire me to like dig them out at the root rather than just try and push them away or try and tell myself that it doesn't matter that I won't have them someday, right? So we're never really out of that. And so when we consider these bodies that hurt and age and, you know, suddenly like don't look the same that they used to, and those emotions that come up as a result of it, I think it's really important to keep that focus on, okay, what is mine? And just, you know, a confrontation with my own mortality, or like not quite recognizing myself in the mirror, or, you know, just like what's mine here? And then also what is underneath that. And it's this like lurking fear of what's going to happen to me if I don't have these privileges. And as a, you know, a relatively young, relatively thin, white, cis woman, well, I've got a lot of privilege that I'm coming in with. So it means that then that could mean that I show up to my 40s being a little bit more shooken up by it. None of that means that I'm a bad person. It means that there's a need for curiosity here that doesn't happen when we're just trying to control and isolate and be like, no, I don't think about that. I don't think about that, right? Because that doesn't jive with who I am, with my brand. We've all got brands at this point, right? That doesn't fit. Instead, when we're able to be curious at what's there, what are we willing to find? What are we like actually willing to feel? It's not actually always going to feel good, unfortunately. A lot of it's going to feel bad, like according to that binary, because grief has to be felt, right? If we're really getting into these bodies that have been colonized, that have been, you know, pressured to fit these norms and boxes, then we're going to have to be willing to feel some deep grief and rage and despair even at actually returning to them. And that means that we're going to be able to feel joy and gratitude and love because we've also returned to them, right?
I'm so grateful you just named that because I think the fear of going into it, I mean, we had dinner before this and we were just talking about how it's so easy just to numb ourselves. We can hold up these boxes we have and have access to television shows, telephone calls, social media, the whole thing, and how it can become so disconnecting to the point where we can't even see. We can't even see what's under the surface. Like, if you weren't so willing to excavate that, I think you would have felt a lot of discomfort, and it could have manifested itself in a lot of different ways. How important do you feel like it is to go into it?
Yeah. Oof. I wish it weren't important, honestly. Like, don't you?
Yes,
like, don't you wish that it just like, I'll just like numb out and like, you know, like that's why when I see somatics being used as something to sell, right? Like selling this like idea that you can be calm and you can feel good and it can be easy and your relationships will be better and the weight will just fall off and like all these things that, like I said, my algorithm might be a little bit like, you know, we all have our own algorithms. I know that mine is definitely influenced by the fact that I've been teaching yoga and being in the world of somatics for the last like 20 years. But when I see that, I'm just like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Like you can use breath to calm yourself, right? You have to question, okay, why is an app like Calm or Headspace? Last I checked, they were in the $1 billion. Like they are massively successful according to capitalism. Why? Right? Like why? Why do they get to have that much success within capitalism? I think that a large part of it is because they actually do work as a numbing device. You can breath work your way into numbness also, right? You can meditate your way into oneness also. I've seen it, right? You spend some time in the white wellness world and you see it. So I wish it weren't necessary to feel this stuff because it certainly doesn't make me a blast at parties all the time, right? It's like sometimes I'm a real downer. And you don't get to, like, what's that Khalil Gibran poem about sorrow and joy? Like, your sorrow carves the space for your joy. You don't get to choose. So you get to either choose. You either get to live in this tiny little narrow space, or you're going to have to be willing to go into these bigger and bigger spaces, which means, okay, more joy, gratitude, bliss, love, connection, all of it. And you risk your heart, right? Like, you're going to be heartbroken.
Yeah.
it's inevitable. So it's deeply important. I think the gift that somatics offers in the way that I have been privileged to study it and teach it is that because it's not just my body, if I was just trying to do that in just my own body, I think I would have broken into fragments a long time ago, and not in a cute way. Like just like it would have been too much because it's too much to hold. But because I'm in a relational practice where I let my body be held by the earth, then there's some place for it to go, right? Gravity is a supportive force that I consciously cultivate in my day-to-day life. And that lets me feel things that would otherwise burst me into pieces because it has someplace to go. And I said, oh yeah, my last fuck flew away. It didn't. Not really.
Yeah.
Right? I still have moments.
Yeah, we
where
do.
I'm like,
It comes in.
Of course. And it's easier to have moments where you're feeling good, where like you're feeling good. And then something comes along and shakes you and you're like, uh-oh.
But I feel like, at least within my experience, the more you get used to the breadth of experiences, it's like like flavor, food. If I could just cook with
Just salt.
Yeah. And I could be in this safe little zone and it could be fine. I could just be totally fine. I could eat at Baker Square every day for the rest of my life and I would be fine. But once I start going, okay, what is this bitter flavor? What is this thing I don't like? What is this thing that's so sweet? How can I put all of these things together? And all of a sudden, it's like I'm able to hold so much more. And in my experience, it takes practice. It takes practice to hold all of that. Like you said, otherwise, sometimes you feel like you're going to break into a million pieces. But actually, it's a safe place to settle. It just feels, it's big and it's wide and it contains all the hard stuff and all the good stuff.
Yeah.
One thing that you talk about in your book that I love, and I think this kind of relates, is you talk about the body as an ecotone, which I'd never heard that word before.
Yeah.
And I love it. So what is that word and what does it have to do with our bodies?
Yeah. Okay. An ecotone is a really cool word. It's a combination of the word ecology, which comes from the Greek oikos, meaning house, and tonos, meaning tension. So it's a tension between two ecological homes, so two different biomes. So where a river meets a meadow, where mountains come down and meet a bay, the roadside edge, any edge is an ecotone. It has aspects of two different habitats. And because it has aspects of both, it's not an either or. It's a true removal of the binary because it's not either or. It's something else entirely. But it's a place of vibrancy. More species tend to be there. Like if you look at a roadside, you find a lot of wildflowers there when they're not disrupted by invasives. But even still, you'll tend to find a lot of different species in that roadside edge, right? So an ecotone is where two different things come to touch. And the body is an ecotone because I'm prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. I have both bacteria and animal cells in me. So I'm not even like, what is really being human, right? If I consider that I have more bacteria cells in me than I have human cells, that's wild on its own. Like my skin is certainly an ecotone. It's not me. It's not like the top edge of my skin, right? My most sensitive place where I engage with the whole of the world, right? Everything that ever touches me through that space. It's not me exactly. It's not the inner me. It's not outside of me. It's this edge where arguably life is happening, right? So it's this vibrancy that exists. So when I think of ecotones, it helps me recognize, okay, for example, conflict. If I think of conflict as a either or thing, or even that idea that like, oh, no one's ever fully right and no one's ever fully wrong. But is it something else entirely where it's like, rather than trying to figure out, okay, can we split up the blame and be like, well, you get 51% and I get 41% this time, but the next time, it's going to be mostly mine or whatever. I feel like that happens a lot in, especially like intimate relationship arguments, right? What if it's an ecotone? And so it's like, all right, there's you, here's me. There's something in between us that only exists because we're different. And rather than thinking of it as a conflict that we have to parse out and divide, can we see what's here, what's actually here between us, right? We're going to call it conflict, and it gets called conflict when like our very tender emotions get brought into it. Fears come up, like, am I safe here, right? And obviously, huge caveat, like we don't do this with people who are abusive, right? We don't have to do this with anyone.
Yeah.
We get to say no, But if we're choosing to be in an intimate relationship with someone, to be in intimacy with somebody, if we're choosing to let our gravitational fields affect each other, then rather than a conflict, it's an ecotone. And it's like, I'm not trying to push you away. I'm trying to see what's here between us, right? And that to me offers so much more possibility. And then recently, I've been thinking about, as I've been teaching on this tour, people have been asking, how do you feel the grief and the joy? Because we're living through just horrors, right? Talk about our phone. It's like, it's not just memes and jokes. It's also like burning people, right? So how am I supposed to feel grief and hope or gratitude or just like the joy at seeing, a child enjoying their day, knowing that what's happening to other children? How am I supposed to hold that? It feels like I might explode. It feels like I might be shattered. Right? Considering the ecotone of grief and joy, it's like, well, we live here now. We live in an ecotone that has aspects of abject grief and horror and, thankfully, joy. I was just sitting yesterday, sitting and having a conversation with a friend where it's like, we're sitting outside. It's a beautiful day. We were talking about this. And it's like, yeah, you have to hold both. Because both things are happening. I can't deny that I'm sitting in this beautiful sunlit field because horrors are happening. That's denying reality. I also can't deny that horrors are happening because I'm just sitting in this beautiful sunlit field. I don't see it. So that also is an ecotone, right? Like this is where I feel like it opens up possibilities to hold seemingly disparate realities.
There's just so much there.
Good thing it's recorded.
Like, wow. Yeah, I can't wait to go back and listen to that. We're often taught about the body in machine-like terms, like machine-like parts, and that our bodies have like these linear, straight things.
Yeah.
And as you so clearly point out in your book, this is a direct derivative from systems such as patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, where productivity and rigor and rigidity are valued far higher than softness and squishiness and vulnerability. But as you say in the book, this idea of these machine-like parts is just not true. Like, what is the truth of our bodies?
Yeah, I mean, everything's in relationship. Right? Everything's in relationship in a machine too, but everything's really squishy and wet in our actual bodies.
We're squishy.
We're squishy and dark and wet and weird, and nothing is straight. There's actually no, as far as I know, and all the anatomists I've talked to, there's no real straight line in the body, partly because of how water interacts with gravity. Water spins down to the earth, and we're always in a relationship with the earth. So that's why our bones spiral. Like, you're a chef, so think about the last time that you touched a chicken thigh bone. It has a bit of a spiral, and so do our femurs, right? So does everything in us. So everything is spiralic and curvy and always changing, very adaptable and responsive down to the cellular level. Very little prescriptive and much more adaptive, responsive. And yeah, this idea of things like, the heart being a pump, yes, muscularly we can say it pumps. But thinking of it like a pump, like I have an oil pump in my car, it lines me up with industry, right? And especially when then it's just like, oh, well, the heart never rests. Like, just pumps your whole life, never rests. And it's like, that's actually not true. The heart actually does rest. Every heartbeat has the diastolic cycle is the resting cycle. It's longer than the systolic cycle, the active cycle. And even the systolic cycle has a diastolic cycle within it. The heart rests all the time. And that's why we're able to have a muscle the size of our fist move blood through our body, through the 60,000 miles of capillaries and veins and arteries all our life. Right? Because it rests. But the heart is a pump story doesn't offer that. Right? So they can seem innocuous, but I think that it's, our language gives meaning. We're creatures of story. So the way that we think of ourselves, the way that we tell ourselves who we are, either lines us up with concrete streets and buildings and hierarchical systems, or with like the wild, wet, mossy world. Like, we're getting into stick season. People call it stick season when the leaves fall down. It's dendrite season. They look like little nerve cells, right? They look like branching capillaries. It's like we're being mirrored all the time by the natural world, and that increases awe rather than this feeling of just like the world is just, I'm in these lines. It changes to be like, I'm much more related to the sky than I am to a ceiling, right? So I can change what I'm giving my focus to.
Can we talk about awe for a second?
Yeah.
I think it's so, well, I'm just going to let you take it from there.
Okay.
I love what you have to say about awe.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So the publisher pulled out a quote from the book, Awe and Curiosity Create Possibilities. And I love that they did that because it's been helpful to like see it and say it so many times. I think it's true. Awe and a sense of curiosity creates possibilities that prescriptive ideas and a need to control do not. We can think about that in terms of like a conflict, right? It's really hard to stay in a place of awe or curiosity when our hurt feelings are up, right? And our fears are up. But it's also the radically different conversation, right? One of my dear friends, he's so great. He's like, you know, my little therapist in my phone. He's a therapist, and so it's great. I can always like be like, I need help, bro. And his like a constant thing. He's just like, oh, I'm really curious about what that person's perspective would be. I'm really curious about why they would have said that. He can be petty if I need him to be. But for the most part, if I'm like, you know, if I'm working through something, I can just be like, Josh, help. And he'll be like, yeah, I'm really curious why that person would have said it like that. Like, and I would wonder, like, if I was in front of them, I would ask, like, you know, what's there? So it's just as an example of, like, holding that place. My godmother, too, she always says, like, I wonder what would be possible. She, like, holds that as a place when she's in a difficult conversation. When I try and get there, it's uncomfortable to try and be curious because curiosity is, like, a vulnerable state.
Yeah.
But it opens up possibilities, right? So... yeah, being in a place of, I think awe is different than curiosity. Curiosity is like, what is here, right? Awe is this like, wow, right? And the awe then, to me, feels like a way to soothe those very tender, scared places that would push me to wanting to control or just like isolate or detonate and just be like, that's it. No, I'm done. Like, I'm not even going to engage with this, right?
Yeah.
Like, which we see, I know people are struggling with their families right now as the American political landscape gets more and more divided. A friend was just telling me the other day how, like, you know, her dad is just sending the family group chat, just, you know, tons of essentially misinformation about Trump as an example, right? And how her sister was just like, I'm done. I'm not going to engage with you anymore. We're done. And while that's a totally understandable response, right? I get it. What a shame when we go there, right? Because when we go there, curiosity's gone. And now the possibility of change diminishes. It's not to say that I never do it. I do it all the time, unfortunately. And I can still recognize it as it's not what I wish to be doing, right? It's not my aspirational space. That's where I go when I get scared. So awe, to me, it doesn't change how I actually feel about, like, I'm not like, wow, that's awesome. You're telling me really horrible misinformation. It's more like, if I can be in a hard conversation and then look at the sky or like get down real close and look at, you know, like just today when we were sitting and talking, Heather and I was noticing how like the spider webs were just like catching the light through her porch. And it was just like this, so beautiful, right? And it can pull me out of whatever is weighing on me and churning up these feelings of despair, hopelessness, grief, heartbreak. Not to toss it away, but to allow myself to be infused with a bit more curiosity, like a touch, right? As a cook, you know, that's sometimes all we can do, and that's sometimes actually what really matters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
It's interesting because it sounds like after all this conversation, and we're talking about holding a lot, whether we're creating or in an ecotone or whether we're holding, they're the same thing. We're just holding all of these emotions or holding all of these experiences and trying to release the fear.
Yeah.
Which is really the thing that makes us want to control and create hierarchy and create mechanizations. awe can be a tool then to soften, to soothe, to nurture ourselves so that we're more capable, perhaps, of that curiosity, which allows for expansion.
Because isn't awe a bit of a synonym for love? Like not quite, right? In that nature of like synonyms they catch a different, it's describing another facet of the prism. But awe and love live really close together in my body. When I'm in a state of awe, I am in a state of love that doesn't need to cling or grasp or control, right? It's just like, wow, this is beautiful. This is so beautiful, right? And it's like, when you see the Grand Canyon or when you see the sunrise or when the Perseids are streaking across the sky, it's like, this is beautiful. And so fear comes in and it can last night I was teaching us a meditation class, and I was feeling it as we were practicing that it can, sometimes we get so hollow, like the flavor gets taken out of our lives just through the constant rush and haste, and also just like the ways that we're sort of not given time to be in awe, right? We're just pushed.
Yeah.
And then like that hollow space, it's hungry for something. And then the fear comes and it's just like, well, now I've got that. And so it's very easy for me to get into a fearful place when I'm feeling a bit worn and hollow and frayed. Awe soothes those parts of me, so I move into a space of love rather than a space of fear, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to look differently, but I'm going to feel differently moving through it.
How can somatic practice help us move through other emotions that we might be feeling? I guess maybe the question is a deeper one, because first we have to understand that we're feeling things in our bodies. And I feel like many of the times we don't even know that.
Right. Yeah. Understandably, head up, right? Just think it through. Don't feel it. Dirty, messy, unreliable body, right? Clear, perfect mind. But no, everything, as you were saying at dinner, everything that we see and have any kind of reaction to is registered in the body. I did see a meme recently. Diana Rose, I think is her name. It's Damascena is her handle, I think, or something like that. But she was saying how it's not the body keeps the score. It's the body is a library. The body keeps the lore, which I love, right? As a book lover, I love that so much better because I don't want to think of my body as a scorekeeper that's
tallying.
Yeah, tallying and being like, no, you lose, right?
Yeah.
Or somehow you win.
Right.
But the body keeps the lore makes so much more sense to me where it's I have this this library of all these different emotions that I've ever experienced. I have to be careful that I'm not letting those past experiences unnecessarily influence the present. But it can also be this spice cabinet where I can pull down and be like, oh yeah, this is a little bit of that and a little bit of this. So yeah, realizing that we have these bodies that can feel and sense, I think it also ties into what we were talking about earlier where, recognizing that there's social, cultural, systemic reasons that we wouldn't feel the body rather than being like, oh, it's another thing I'm not doing and now I have to do it, right? But instead be like, well, what am I sitting on right now? Right? Can I feel the temperature difference between metal chair and warm body? Because that's a feeling. It's not necessarily that I have to go into my abandonment wounds from childhood. I can also just go into can I feel the hug of the sock around my foot? Can I feel the softness of my sweater? Or maybe if we're wearing something differently, there's an itchiness. This is feeling the body. It's not necessarily, oh, now I have to just great. Now I have to feel all my horrible, awful feelings that I don't want to feel, right? It's my skin is in a constant communication with the world around me. What is it feeling right now? And I think that increasing that fluency, it opens up more of the possibilities because there's curiosity there. What am I really feeling right now? Whether that's tactile or also emotional. What's really here? Yeah.
And then our bodies can inform us. And you have an example of that in the book. Oh,
the body's going to be massively informative.
I'm getting like messages here because all of a sudden I'm noticing that my shoulders are super tight and I'm clenched. Oh, wait, am I like stressed? Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I am.
I am
not even realizing it.
Yeah. And then the body is like, it's a guide. Like our living bodies are guides, lore keepers, deep comforters, also, unfortunately often in pain. But there's this wisdom that the mind can only search for and the body actually can guide us towards when we learn to listen to what those signals are, right? I mean, I know plenty of people that I can do it myself, like let alone like feeling stress. It's like, wait, am I hungry?
Yeah, right.
Like, have I drank water today? Like these basic things, but then also like, am I sad? Why am I on my phone still? Right? Like what's actually here asking to be felt, right? The more we ask those questions with patience and a place for it to go, like no matter what I'm feeling, my body's on the ground and I can trust that gravity's going to hold me. Right now, I can let my body drop into gravity. It's going to hold me. So I'm here. And that lets me turn towards whatever I might have been trying to avoid, right?
I love how you call somatic practice a practice of patient attention because it's so subtle. Yeah. And yet that subtlety of turning towards something, at least in my own experience, is how I don't want to make this sound easy, but it is how I move through it in a way that's much more graceful than pushing it away. And this is just my own experience. When I do that, it lasts a lot longer and then it rears its head at very unfortunate times. Whereas if I can be patient and turn towards it with that trust of gravity, then I can be curious and allow it to work its way out or through or morph into something else without it turning into something different. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And it's, not just patient, but Rowan White, Akwesasne seed keeper, an amazing writer, talks about reverent curiosity, where there's just this there's that awe again, like what is here? If I stay in a place of patient, reverent curiosity, I'm here, right? Rather than out in some story.
This seems to be a practice that could lead to helping us trust our bodies. I think most of us in this culture are not taught to ever trust our bodies. We're taught to trust this person or that person or, anything else.
Yeah.
Do you have any other tips for people in helping them learn to trust their own bodies?
Oh. I mean, I think, but, sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. Who wrote this book? I mean, I know I've mentioned it a few times, but this practice of, in the book is organized around a somatic method. I call it the GROWL method. It's an acronym. Ground, relate, observe, widen, love. First, it was just going to be grow. I thought that's what it was. And then I realized that all of that is actually pointing us towards love as something. And it starts with the ground because it's really important that we start there. If we don't do anything else, we got to go there to that feeling of gravity as a supportive force. It doesn't just pull us down. Normal force, it's called in Newtonian physics, but it's pushing up. So right now, this chair is exerting an equal amount of force into my body as my body's exerting into it. And that's why the chair doesn't fall down and I don't fall down, right? The chair and my body are exerting force on the floor, same thing. So we're held by this dance of supportive forces. The earth is pushing back up through floor, chair, me. And my body's dropping down into chair, floor, earth, right? So that right there gives us a practice that the mind can occupy itself with when it wants to go into stories or numb out in some other way. And then also recognizing that it's not that I'm on the earth. I'm not even grounding in the earth. It's that I'm earth. My body is made of minerals, earth minerals. It's a combination of stardust and deep molten core, right? And everything that I've ever eaten has come in some form or another from the earth, even if it's petroleum-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything that has ever made me is earth. So why do I think of myself as separate from it? That's just like colonized, isolated violence, right? It's a violence on our own bodies to think of ourselves as separate from earth. And then it allows us to be violent to the earth. It's a lot harder to be violent to your own body, which like this is not coming from, a white woman from New England for the first time. This is like indigenous culture keepers have been saying this the entire time. Like, stop, right? Like, stop what you're doing. You're hurting the body, right?
Yeah.
But we can, in our own individual bodies, feel that. And I think then it starts to ripple out into these systems because unfortunately it starts to feel like, well, there's no use. I can't do anything. I can't change the world. We're living through the horrors of realizing that even when we gather together en masse, we still can't make things stop, right? Even when we say very clearly, this is terrible, this is wrong, it has to stop, it doesn't stop. So it can start to feel like, well, then there's just nothing left to do. And that is like the deepest numbing despair that's out there. But then what about these systems? Prentice Hemphill wrote the book, What It Takes to Heal. It came out just this year. It's really great. And in it, they're talking about how the family systems, the community systems, all of these, they ripple out into the whole. So how am I influencing my own family systems? Like the ways, how am I influencing my own internal family systems, to use some therapy talk, right? Like the different parts of myself and how I talk to them and engage with them or try and isolate them or shame some and, hold on to others. How am I actually engaging with all of this? Is it from isolation and control and trying to keep myself lifted up in a way? Or is it like, no, I am earth, and so all of this is, right? There's no need to push anything away. I can just be in the place that it's here.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different place to have any kind of experience from, right?
And my belief is that if we want to enact change, it has to start there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just perpetuating systems that we don't even know we're perpetuating.
Right. Yeah. Grace Lee Boggs says that, that it's not just a revolution. It has to be a human evolution. We have to become more human versions of ourselves. Right? There's that quote that just gets said so much that it becomes almost an empty word, but you have to be the change that you wish to see. And that is hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy, right? Like, and it's interesting to do these kinds of like public talks. Like currently, like my mom isn't here, but she's definitely been at some of my book talks, right? And I've been like, yeah, like she has seen the parts of myself that are not necessarily the closest to my aspirational self, right? Or like navigating heartbreak or like, conflict within relationships or dissolving relationships. It's like, it's really hard to keep that alive there. It's easy when it's good, right? It's easy when it's good. And then it's hard when your neighbor's rude or, like you get your heart broken or whatever. It's hard then to be like, okay, I'm not going to now go into this place where like I make you the enemy or like this is like I push and instead be in that porous place because the body's also porous, semi-permeably porous. Not everything gets in, not everything goes out, but you can't have a non-porous cell. You can't have a non-porous body. Am I allowing myself to be porous, right? Can I feel what's here? It's very hard and often risky because it increases the chance of heartbreak. You don't get to do it. The only other option is that you just isolate yourself off and you're miserable in a different kind of way, right?
Yeah. My last question ties into this, and I'm curious about your answer. How do we live a life that's anchored in love? Love is the last chapter of your book.
Yeah. No, it is so funny. We were talking at dinner that I was like, I don't know. I don't. I know how to do it when it's feeling good.
Yeah.
I know how to live anchored in love when I'm falling in love. It's a lot harder when I'm in heartbreak, right? It's like I know how to love when things are good, when like, I'm fed and, clean clothes and a nice warm bed. It's a lot harder when like, things get scary or, the upheaval happens. But I do think, so recently, especially as I've been exploring these ideas a bit like in a different way, right? Because a book's you get it. A book's a still point.
Mm-hmm.
I finished the book like 2 years ago, and now I've got like 10 months, 11 months of sharing it actively, like touring with people and having conversations, which means that these ideas have been like changing, right?
Yeah.
So this like emergent idea of what love is, it really, like, I keep on talking about gravity, but I feel like that is it. That feeling to be anchored in love feels to me like it's really close to awe. Mm-hmm. So if me talking about gravity, you're just like, I don't get it. Just think of how you feel when you look at like the most beautiful sunset. And it's just like, wow, this is so beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. That to me feels like love. And if I can feel that, if I don't feel like I can get into a loving state for whatever reason, if I can get to that awe state, I'm almost there. Mm-hmm. So it's like at least a little closer. But to be anchored in love, it does feel like when I let myself, and I hope you all are doing this with me, if you let your body actually be dropping down, and notice I didn't even change the position of my body. I could, and it would be great to do it, but I don't have to even. Any position that I'm in, my body's held by the earth, and that means that I am being pulled down, and then I am also being pushed back up through. I'm held in this dance of sky and earth. And if I can get myself there, which means I have to get out of my own way that's telling me these stories of how I'm not there. I'm not there because I don't have X, Y, or Z relationship. I'm not there because I haven't amassed X, Y, or Z amount of wealth. I'm not there because whatever, right? If I can get out of my own way with that and just be held in that embrace that gravity offers, that to me feels like I'm in a state of what we call love, but that feels like such a tiny word for what that feeling is. Because love also, we use that word too much. Mm-hmm. We use that word for everything. I love tacos, and I love this sweater, and I love my mom, mm-hmm. and I love my dog, and I love that show that I watched, and oh my gosh, I love that book. Or we use it for everything. And I was saying to y'all earlier, like I just had I took my dog to dog school, and they were saying, don't use the word sit until you know that she knows how to sit. Because if you use the word sit too much, she's just going to become numb to it. She won't hear it anymore. You have to like wait until she knows what sit means and then use the word. And I think we do that a lot with things like love, where it's like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? But there's this state of being that we almost get when we call it love. Awe. Just pure beingness. And that's the practice. That's the somatic practice, is can you get there? Everything else, all the breath work and the movement, and it's helpful and not have having a frozen shoulder sucks. It's hard to be in a state of awe and curiosity when you can't move your arm. So all that stuff is important, but the core of it is, can you be in a state of love? Everything else becomes this very welcomed and necessary side effect, but it's not the focus, mm-hmm. right? So I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Abigail.
Yeah, thank you.
Your book, Returning Home to Our Bodies, is beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Split Rock.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Split Rock.
Yeah, thanks for recording. Thanks, viewers.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.